Welcome to the Dreams of Consciousness podcast. If you'd be so kind, would you mind introducing yourself?
Uh, I'm Erol Ulug from the band Teeth, or sometimes people just call me Rolly. I play guitar and I do vocals. I'm also a producer and engineer.
And how would you describe the music of Teeth?
Oh, we're just right out the gate. That's right there. Got it. Well, it's dissonant. It's brutal. It's large. I'd say it largely falls within death metal, but it's not exactly. From what other people have told me, it's not traditional death metal per se. I
And
guess that's.
would you agree with that characterization? Do you feel that your music is not traditional or a
Um.
traditional form of death metal?
Yeah, I suppose. Yeah. I mean, like, yeah.
And why do you think that is? Why do you think people don't see you as traditional death metal? I mean, I can tell there are
um.
elements of things like Gorguts and Immolation, which are quite long running bands. But
Yeah.
why do you think people don't
100%.
see uh, what you do as traditional death metal?
Well, um, I don't know, just it's always like hard for me to kind of give a interpretation of it because I'm so in it, and I spend so much time working on music because I also record our records too, so um, I'm so familiar with it. It's a little bit hard for me to like quite answer that, uh, not objectively, but anyway. I suppose it's just that we're, especially I think on Finite, the newest EP, we're kind of we're not really afraid to tread on territory that we haven't done before, or that we haven't really heard a lot of other what are considered death metal bands do, and we kind of don't give a shit, like as long as we're vibing with it. That's basically the bottom line.
So, not long ago, I interviewed somebody who wrote a book about US black metal and kind of uh, the unifying, I guess, philosophy for me. The unifying philosophy behind US black metal is most of the bands don't give a shit what people think of their music. They're just doing what they like.
Yeah, I mean, as an ethos, we're right there. I'd say, I mean, kind of to piggyback on your previous question a little more. Um, I think part of it too is that there's a pretty wide spread of influences in Teeth. Like, I mean, we're big fans of all a bunch of forms of metal, not just that metal. Um, but me and Alex in particular are both pretty into jazz. I actually studied jazz in college. I have a bachelor's in jazz performance. So that certainly informs what we do. Um, what we do is not jazz, but, you know, um, I think that certainly at least indirectly informs how we approach things. And kind of, I think that explains some of how people might consider us non-traditional.
So this is a little bit of a tangent, but that's an interesting point. Um, you can any number of elements can lead someone or a band to be described as metal. The vocals, just the use of low oppressive chords. When you say that what Teeth does isn't jazz, what is it about jazz that makes your music not jazz and definitely metal?
Really, I mean, okay, there's not improvisation in Teeth. Um, that would be, I think, the big line in the sand. Um, some of the creative process of coming up with the riffs is closer to improvisation. Like sometimes we're at practice and kind of just jamming freely. and we stumble upon, and some, oftentimes we'll just have like a phone recording, and then we might stumble upon something kind of in that way and then go back to it and kind of figure it out and use it as a part. But it's not really jazz in the sense that, like, when we're playing live, that shit's not improvisation. Like, that's very worked out, very predetermined and rehearsed. So I'd say that's like the fundamental difference, really. I mean, besides the more obvious differences in just the aesthetics, like, we're using very high gain on our guitars and bass. The drums are not like bebop sounding drums. The way it's mixed is not the way really any jazz record I've ever heard is mixed. I can think about I'm sure if I played Teeth for a lot of my professors, when I was studying jazz back in college, they'd be like, why is the kick drum and the bass so loud? Everything's so distorted. The aesthetics are very not from jazz. The aesthetics, or maybe the tonal colors, for lack of a better term, that we are using are very much metal. So.
Cool. So I should mention, sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah.
So I should mention that Teeth have been on Dreams of Consciousness before. I did a Q&A with Justin back in 2016.
Sick.
But for anyone who hasn't read that, would you mind just giving a brief history of the band and how you guys met and what led you to form this project?
Sure. So, where to begin? Well, so I guess like the real beginning is kind of like Justin, the other guitar player vocalist, was kind of like a super fan of one of my early bands called Nuns with Guns. And he actually has a Nuns with Guns tattoo, which is interesting. Even though he has since kind of covered it up, it's still there. Anyway, he was like the dude at our shows, and I didn't really know him at the time, but I was like, oh, it's that dude. It's really fucking pumped to see us, and he goes berserk and, crowd kills people and whatever. He's that dude who's like always going off for us. Hell yeah. So that's kind of like originally how I knew him. Then later I learned that he was quite a talented vocalist, and him and I linked up and began a grind band called Wage Slave. For reason, I don't know, we'll just fast track that. That band didn't really end up going anywhere, but me and Justin still like working with each other. So we decided to start Teeth together. And then at that point, he switched from just a vocalist to doing both guitar and vocals. And I also took on vocal duties. In Wage Slave, I just did guitar, he just did vocals. So in Teeth, we do both. And then the other difference is like Wage Slave was kind of more tech grind, and like really fucking busy and kind of just like overkill. Teeth originally started more of like a death doom band because the drummer, Wage Slave, would not have had the attention span to play the slower stuff that we were kind of into at the time. So that's really the birth of Teeth. And then as time has gone on, so that would have been like 2013, I think, yeah. We would met up and started working on stuff 2013. Our first record, Unremittance, came out in 2014. And then it slowly kind of mutated and become less doom metal and more death metal, for lack of a better term.
So coming out of Wage Slave, did you guys already have a good sense of what kind of music you wanted to make?
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of like, so it's kind of like very much a response to Wage Slave. Like Wage Slave was very fast and very busy and kind of just not very groove oriented either. So like um, that like we kind of began out of like as a reaction to how Wage Slave was, and uh, you know that first record is kind of generally more slower or mid paced. I mean, there's still some blast beats and stuff, but it's for sure our like uh, more doomy record of all the stuff that we've put out so far, I'd say.
And how do you look back on that first album? Do you feel it's still representative of Teeth and what you guys do?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I mean, like it has, you know, our sense of like our kind of like harmonic concept of like really trying to avoid, I don't know, just avoiding typical harmonic patterns that like we, or really me, I hear just left and right, and a certain predictability. I feel like that's already there on that record. Um, and I don't know, like I feel like the essence of Teeth is there. It just it has evolved since then.
And I think when we talk about this latest release, we'll talk a little bit more about how your sound has evolved. I'm curious. You mentioned a music school education. Do all you
Yeah,
guys have a similar background?
fuck no. No, I went to school. No one else went to school, which is actually great because um, it kind of gives us this unique balance. Whereas, like, sometimes I can get overly concerned with how something is theoretically. Um, Whereas Justin is much more like a feral child. And, sometimes, like, everyone in the band definitely has good music sensibilities. Um, and I think Alex, actually, our drummer now, actually did do some studying in college, but I'm by far the most studied, like formally studied musician of the lot. And but I think it's a good balance. I'm actually pretty thankful that not everyone in the band is like that, because I think it kind of keeps us focused. It keeps the overall sound focused on getting too academic, which honestly for me is something I really have come to dislike in music. It's just when something is, I don't know, when music gets kind of indulgent or uh, just too like heady. That's definitely something that I try to kind of get away from as time goes on, even though I think I never will, in a way.
So, given your background and the extremely high level of musicianship on your music, would you describe Teeth as technical? Is that something?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, yeah, definitely. I mean, but I would say that like you could throw technical as a descriptor, but it's not really a focus. And I think actually as time has gone on, and perhaps we'll see for the next release, I think we're trying to get less focused on that. Like kind of back to what I was talking about, like Wage Slave was certainly more technical than any Teeth really. And been kind of, it's like no matter what I do, there's gonna be some fucking technical bullshit about it. So me personally, I kind of try to of like not really focus on that, because I kind of feel that's just gonna happen no matter what.
I mean, when I think of Teeth, I think of some of the songs on the first album where, for as good as you guys are as musicians, you're not afraid to just play a chord and, make a riff out of a single chord. Even though I think for a lot of
Yeah,
death metal bands, that would be something that would almost be verboten. You know what I mean?
yeah, exactly. Yeah, You're like totally right on the money. I mean, ultimately, um, it's like, how does the sound make you feel? Really, that's like the bigger question. You know, sometimes it is this kind of technical thing that accomplishes a certain goal or gets a certain mood across. Other times, it may be something musically very simple.
Let's talk about your writing process a little bit. Um, when you're approaching songs, do you do you come specifically with a single song in mind, or do you write riffs and batches and then try to sort through to see how the music relates to each other and assemble the songs that way?
Um, well, there isn't really a clear cut answer that's like that is like our process for every song. Sometimes, so usually what happens is me or Justin, or occasionally together, we come up with a riff. And then, like, I don't know, we come up with the initial idea. And then if we're usually the litmus test is if we're kind of like giggling around and like it's kind of makes us, we're kind of like, oh, what the fuck? Like, that's so stupid. Yes, let's do it. That's usually like the kind of test as to whether an idea should be entertained. And then once we kind of have maybe not necessarily the beginning riff of a song, but like the main theme of a song per se. Once we have that, then I personally kind of like to think of like once you have that piece, maybe taking elements of that riff and developing new riffs out of it. So it's not really just this string of, you know, disconnected ideas that you're just kind of like throwing together like a salad. It's more of like it's like you kind of come up with a seed of an idea and then it organically sprouts out into like a tree. Um, that's kind of more of how I like to approach it. But sometimes it's kind of unpredictable. Sometimes we just get together and kind of like I was saying, like there's a certain improvisational aspect to the writing process. Sometimes we're just playing a riff and we'll be working on it. And then I don't know, we'll play it 4, maybe 8 times, whatever, usually something like that. And then I'll stop and Justin will just start doing something. Or maybe I'll just start doing something kind of spontaneously. And the other will we'll look at each other and be like, oh, what the fuck? Hell yeah, okay. And then we'll go with that idea. But the goal is generally to try to like make the ideas connected in some like greater scheme, not really just like riff, 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 and just throw them together.
Do you and Justin write and arrange the bulk of the material?
Yeah, I'd say so. Often, what happens is him or I like. Sometimes I do it on my own. Like sometimes I'll just demo something, like the song "Concubine," the groovy third track on Finite. I pretty much just sat down with my guitar one day and just wrote that in about 2 hours or so. It was just a good day and the riffs were flowing. And surprisingly, it didn't really change in form. I think, you know, some little bit of details changed and Alex definitely put his spin on it, but the form of the song, like the overall structure and just the, 90% of it musically was pretty much how it was originally conceived. Other songs like Garden of Eyes, that was like a much more like stretched out, like that song was really kind of like more than almost like we came up with like movements of it and then kind of like put them together over time. So it can vary greatly.
And when is a song done for you? When are you happy with what you guys have come up with?
That's a difficult question to answer. You kind of there's kind of just a point at which, yeah, this feels finished. I can't really say that like I have a particular process for that. It's just kind of like you work on it, and you know, yeah, it it just seems. I mean, sometimes we'll come up with something, and we'll have a song going a certain way, and then maybe, I don't know, a month later, Justin will be like, I don't really like that part anymore, like some part on the end or something in the middle, and then we'll restructure it. But for Finite, not a hell of a lot of that happened, to be honest. It was a lot of the pieces were kind of written in like maybe one or two writing sessions, like kind of a pretty condensed time period overall.
And how do you account for that? Is part of it the fact that you guys have been working together for a significant amount of time?
Yeah, I'm sure that contributes to it. And yeah, I think it's just like, him and I have been playing music for, about a decade together, And, I mean, he was, and he was already kind of a fan of stuff I was doing for maybe half a decade before that. So there's, it's like we kind of speak a certain language musically together that certainly by this point, it's like we're pretty in tune with each other. And like, yeah, I don't know. It just kind of happens. Like when we get together, you know, and the riffs just kind of go out, and sometimes they don't always get used. Like sometimes we'll write a whole song, and then time will go by, like we'll be stoked on it, and then time will go by and we'll scrap it. That happened quite a bit on Curse of Entropy, the previous record. But Finite was actually pretty, like, we would meet up, work on stuff, and a lot of stuff from the first conception of the idea is what is on the record.
Sorry, my computer is doing weird things. Can you give me just 1 second?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry about that. Can you hear me?
Good.
I've been having all sorts of problems with Pro Tools. Anyways, so I'd like to talk about Curse of Entropy just briefly before we go on to Finite. Curse of Entropy was your second album. It came out in 2019.
Yes.
Did you go into that album with maybe an intention to do things differently from your debut?
Yeah. Yes. Yes, we did. Okay. Actually, the answer is more specific. It was an intention to do things differently from the split we did with Barguest, which was one like 23-minute song. And it was actually a lot of why the Curse of Entropy is the way it is was in response to that song. That song, I don't know, we kind of like, I got the idea, oh, what if we do a long song? And then like we kind of like went with it. And then it kind of got to this point where like it just kind of it kind of felt like we were, I don't know, we had like, oh, I remember what it was. Okay. So the label that was going to put it out said they wanted 25 minutes of music or something like that. So we were like, well, okay, that's the goal. Let's get to that. And it kind of ended up putting us in this like quantity over quality uh, thing of like, we got to get to 25 minutes, which is kind of stupid. And it's like, especially for aggressive music, I mean, I like long, I don't know, especially if I feel like if you're trying to make a aggressive statement musically, brevity is often your friend. I mean, you know, there can be aggressive, slow, and like long form things, but I don't know, especially when you're talking more about death metal, just getting in and getting out really just fucking works for me. So the Curse of Entropy was very much a reaction to that whole long process. And like, there's a certain fatigue that the band experienced in creating that. Like, and we never played it live. We would play stretches of it, but we never played it as a complete thing. It was just kind of like, it became this thing that was kind of too ambitious for its own good. And after going through all of that, you know, when we were sitting down, okay, what do we do next? Well, we just did one long song, and we're kind of burnt out on it. So let's do some fucking short songs and like just, you know, get in and just hit it quick and get the fuck out. And that's kind of what set the tone for the Curse of Entropy. And that's what explains why that record is considerably more death metal than any of the stuff we released before it. And I think I can speak for the whole band in the sense that, like, I think we feel like that record is where we really found what we have been trying to do since the beginning, really.
So speaking of considerably more death metal, Luke LeMay from Gorguts provided some guest vocals on the album. I believe members of Teeth have cited Gorguts as an influence. Can you tell me a little bit about how Luke LeMay got involved and how you guys got him to do vocals on the song Husk?
Yeah. So, I mean, yeah, like Gorguts is a huge influence on what we do. I mean, them and Immolation are kind of like I don't know, the elder statesmen of dissonant death metal, of that whole school of death metal. You know, we've been fans of Gorguts for many, many years, long before the band even was a thing. And we were lucky enough to have a mutual friend who knew him, who out and if he'd be willing, and surprisingly he was. And it's kind of that simple. Like he listened to music. He said he thought it was really brutal, and he actually said it made him want to work on New Gorguts, which for us to hear was like, holy shit, fuck yeah. And then it was cool because we'd given him somewhat of a template to work on. Like, you know, I think Justin had laid down like a scratch of like a vocal pattern that we were kind of like, well, this is what we're thinking, and then here are the lyrics. But if you come up with better ideas, by all means, you do you. And he did do that. And what he came back with was so like, I don't know, it was so like the way he kind of like layered his screams and like he did some long stuff and like carried over. Like we hadn't, I don't know, we would have never come up with that. So it was really, really cool. And just kind of like a major fanboy moment for all of us, like having Luke on our record. So yeah, that's pretty much how that went down.
What was your initial reaction when you heard his vocals?
Fuck yeah. Hell yeah. Sensei LeMay on our record? Fuck yeah.
And I believe Curse of Entropy was your first release for Translation Lost, right?
Correct.
How did you guys get involved with them, or how did they get involved with you?
So they contacted us because they heard that Split with Vargas, the long song, and they liked it, and they basically said like, "Hey, we've been, we've been aware of you guys for a bit now. If you're ever interested in working together, let us know." And it kind of just began from there.
And
So it's like that. Sorry.
go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, it's like a lot of ways that split was kind of like a certain crucial growing pains for the band. Like it wasn't so much about that release, really. It's like we kind of figured out what we don't want to do in a lot of ways, as well as that release somehow kind of got us like, got the attention of Translation Loss. It was kind of like that release was a significant bridge into becoming like what we had really wanted to do from the get-go.
And Translation Loss is a good fit for Teeth. Like when I think of Translation Loss, they're not specific, or they're not identified with a specific genre. Instead, they've got a wide range of bands who all have their own kind of quirky spin on underground metal.
Totally. Yeah. We totally feel at home in that regard.
So let's talk about Finite. It's the new release from Teeth. It's a 5-song EP that was released at the end of November through Translation Loss. Can you tell me about the writing process for this EP?
Well, so it's funny because Curse of Entropy came out in late 2019, and then our original plans were to tour and like push that. So we weren't really planning on going directly back into writing mode, but this whole COVID thing, Death Plague happened, and all of our plans got sidelined. So the only thing really left to do was, write new music. And, we were all quarantining at home. And I mean, it was, kind of a perfect scenario to just work on new music because, we're stuck at home. We didn't, at the time, we nor anyone really knew how long this was going to go on, and we're still in it. And so I definitely, that like kind of view that like is like, I don't know, heightened anxiety from that, I think is definitely like a factor in the EP. And it definitely is the reason why the EP happened, certainly when it did. But like the writing process really began like maybe like a month or a month and a half after quarantine began. We finally like got together, like, or not even all of us, it was just 3 of us, me, Justin, and Alex. And we hung out for the first time since that began. And we just hung out for like the whole day and just listened to all sorts of music together. We weren't even really working on music. We were just kind of like just hanging out because we hadn't seen each other in like a month and a half. And we're like, oh man, I miss you. And yeah, we just kicked it and just listened to all sorts of death metal all day. And some other stuff, some jazz and shit too. And I think that kind of like, I mean, it wasn't the intention, but that was kind of actually like the beginning, or that was kind of in retrospect, like almost like a brainstorming or like the, conceptualization phase that would become Finite.
So if I understand your process, your songwriting process correctly, previously you and Justin had written a lot of stuff together, right?
Yeah. So usually what happens is I meet up. So sometimes I just work on stuff by myself. Like I usually, I'll just record on my laptop, like just direct in and use some amp sim, and I'll come up with riffs and then I'll program some drums to those. Or sometimes I'll do that by myself and come up with like a demo for a song that way. Or sometimes I'll do that with Justin and we'll both be plugged in and we'll work on stuff that way. So the writing process is very much like a demoing process at the same time. And then we take those, like once we kind of get it to a certain place, then we'll send the demos to the rest of the guys and see what they say. And then we'll meet up and hash it out in the practice room and, you know, kind of refine it from there. But yeah, like pretty much it always gets demoed with like, you know, scratch guitars and some programmed drums. And then from those demos, we work it out until it becomes the full thing.
Now, with Finite, since you guys had started working on this in quarantine, were you coming up with music individually?
Yeah, somewhat like I said, Concubine was just me in my room. The other songs, Dreamless Hieroglyphs, that's the second track. That's actually the only song that like kind of predates quarantine. That song we actually had around, that was kind of like, I think we wrote that kind of around the time of Curse and Entropy, but it didn't, I think it was like written just after we had like decided on the songs for that record. So that was kind of like a holdover in a way. And I don't know, that like we played that song live a bunch, even like long before we started working on what became Finite. But all the other tracks, I know the last track, Scornful Nexus, me and Justin, we just got together, and for whatever reason, both him and I were kind of in a salty mood. Like he was already, I don't know, I forget what it was, but we were just kind of both on one that day, and we just met up with our guitars and somehow channeled that salty frustration into what it became that song, and kind of explains how it's just like so. It's pretty much like 2 minutes of just nonstop going at you, and then it reaches I don't know, then it finally chills out and just kind of like drones out into that outro section. Say a similar thing with Fog of Futility. I remember that one is definitely one that we wrote together, and you can kind of tell because that song has quite a bit of like two guitar parts. So, you know, I feel like you could feel us kind of writing, like both doing our own thing together. And I feel like that somehow comes through in that song.
So we spoke a little bit about how your first album, Unremittance, was quite different from what you guys are doing presently. How would you compare Finite to your early work?
It's definitely faster. Or let's say the fast tempos are considerably faster. And there are like doomy sections, but they're much fewer and far between than the early stuff. I'd also say the new stuff, I mean, not all of it's concise, but there are songs that are a lot more concise than we were ever before. Like Dreamless Hieroglyphs is 2 minutes and change. And Scornful Nexus is really a 2-minute song with a long ending. So, and it's also the same thing with Concubine. The song's not very long at all. So I don't know, there's kind of like there's a certain like brevity in some of the newer stuff that like we really didn't do that before.
So, as you mentioned at the beginning of our conversation, you are also a producer and an engineer, and you've handled Teeth's recordings since the beginning.
Yeah.
Have your own studio?
Yes. It's called Bright Lights Studio. It's in downtown Santa Ana, California.
Now, are there additional challenges to being both a member of a band and also the producer / engineer?
Yeah, I mean, there's there's challenges and of course benefits. I'd say the challenge is the record's really done when I surrender. I mean, ultimately. I guess that's the case with any producer if you really want to get to it. But it's not like, there's no one else telling me hey man, it's done, it's done kind of when I finally wave the white flag. So, and I mean, the other thing is I feel like if I was working with another producer or engineer, it's very unlikely that I'd get anyone else to go to the lengths that I go for my own music. I mean, I suppose it's possible. And I don't really know concretely because I've never done it. But I just think of how much time I invest in each release. And I don't think I'd get that out of someone else. And I mean, the other side of it is a lot of the a lot of both musicians and producers that I look up to are both, are both. I know, take Meshuggah, for example, they haven't self-recorded all their records, but I'm fairly certain that they've done a reasonable amount of the engineering on, I think, Nothing, and I want to say Colos. They may not have mixed, and I think they did Obzen too themselves. Kurt Ballou has done most of the Converge catalog, I believe, since the No Heroes record. So there's a certain, I don't know. I think there's a certain, if you have a specific vision, who else is going to do it better than you? How can someone else realize your vision better than yourself?
Yeah, that seems to be the main benefit of having a band member who's also an engineer, which is you don't have to explain to an outside party what it is that the sound that exists in your head. You know what I mean? You can find that sound yourself.
I'd say on the other hand, I could get caught up in the minutia, or just maybe, or I can, just be working on it to the point where I'm almost like kind of burning out. I would say those are the potential negatives, but I mean, kind of so be it. That's just how it goes. I'd say the other positive is for example, on Finite, the vocal recordings ended up stretching out quite a bit just for a handful of reasons. Sometimes we'd meet up and because we were, in the midst of COVID, we weren't really practicing like we were or playing live like we were before. So our vocals were kind of not really in shape. We didn't have the endurance that we usually had before that. So I remember there were some sessions where we get together and we just kind of lose it quickly. Now, in the event where we're working with another producer, if that's the case with me, I can just be like, well, whatever, fuck it. Let's meet up next week. And we do that. But, if it's with someone else, then, I got to pay him for his time. And, I feel like, you know, taking it affords us the luxury to take really however much time we're willing to put into it to get it to where it needs to be. We don't have these outside forces of like, oh, we're over budget, or like, you know, oh, he's got another project and, you know, he's not available anymore. You know, it's done when we say it's done.
So the other, I don't know if you call it a drawback, but maybe challenge is that there's a lot more pressure on you as both band member and producer. Um, do you feel that as a challenge or as pressure, or it seems like you're kind of at peace with it?
Um, I do. I mean, because you know, it's like not only not only am I representing the band, and you know, I'm also representing myself. I feel like the band, like the band's output and the quality that I can achieve is also like speaks to me, like that becomes a representation of me as a producer. So it's kind of both. But you know, I know that and I accept it. And I've kind of always done it. Like I I mean, I've kind of always recorded my own bands since I was a teenager. So it's, I'm quite comfortable with it. It's kind of just what I do.
And you've recorded other bands, or you do record other bands as well, right? Not just Teeth.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. Um,
The process different when you're working with other people and it's not your music?
um, somewhat. Uh, I mean, it kind of it depends on the band, really. Like, um, you know, I would say it doesn't differ fundamentally, but it kind of it really depends more on like what is the other band that I'm working with, what is their sonic goal, because you know maybe they want to record live, you know, maybe they don't want to use a click. um, Maybe you know they want to let like the instruments all kind of bleed together, you know, maybe they're going for something less polished, like you know just their aesthetic values are fundamentally different. um, so then I would of course change how I approach it. There's no point in just like pushing everyone through the same process like a cheese grater. But if a band does want like a certain consistency and precision in the end product, then it probably starts to approach how Teeth does things. But even so, there's certain things that I do recording Teeth that I really don't do with other bands. Like for instance, the way we record vocals for Cursive Entropy and Finite, we actually don't use headphones. We just have a mic and we just handled and we just get right up in there and I actually play the music on the monitors. And because like, I mean, the music's not too loud in the monitors. Um, and we're right up in the mic, like just like cupping it basically sometimes even. And, you know, because of how like the sound of, you know, we're not going for these like, you know, we're going for pretty gross and visceral vocals. So doing it that way kind of gets us to a certain sound that we want. Now, most other bands that I work with don't necessarily want that. So, you know, I'll do them a more traditional approach with headphones and kind of more isolated. So it kind of varies.
So, given the period in which you guys were recording this EP, were there additional challenges with regards to social distancing and things like that?
Yeah, because you know like we weren't uh you know we weren't really practicing, like especially early on. We were like, can we practice? Is that like, you know, is that allowed? Like, should we do that? You know, there's all that just anxiety, especially the early quarantine. And, that definitely slowed things down and kind of kept things a little more remote, like kind of pushed things into like me coming up with the demo, sending it to the other guys, and then them kind of giving me feedback, maybe not like, in person. But, or like we would meet up, but maybe not as frequently. And like maybe just like one, just two of us and work on stuff that way. So yeah, it definitely did kind of, it was kind of, it did and it didn't. Like on the one hand, there's a time where, we were collectively like, we weren't, most of us weren't working really. We're just on unemployment. So that gave us time, gave us a lot more time to work on music. But on the other hand, there were just concerns of, trying to be safe with regards to COVID. So it was kind of like a double-edged sword in that regard.
So let's talk about the future. What do you guys have planned now that the EP's out?
Well, we definitely want to get out there and push the EP in the form of touring. I bought a van in late 2019 with the idea to push the Curse of Entropy, and that didn't get use until about last month when we did a short tour with Skeletal Remains and Wolf King. So definitely, getting out there and touring more next year and just in the future in general is an objective. But also we have maybe 4 or 5 songs, demos, and I think we're aiming for a full length as a next release. So yeah, I would say those are our plans.
And what can you tell me about the upcoming full length and the material that you guys are working on?
It's something. It's oh man, it's hard to describe. Like, I feel like it's probably gonna kind of head a little. I want to say it might head more like it might. What we have so far is definitely more on like the brutal side of things, kind of like more Curse of Entropy. But we're also pretty early in, and kind of who knows what we might come up with, because we kind of haven't been in writing mode for a bit now. These were just kind of these new songs that we have are kind of written slowly over the course of this year, because Finite was basically done like I was 95% done with the record in January of this year. So there's been a good amount of time for us to work on new stuff. But yeah, it's definitely, it seems like me and Justin are heading more towards having different, like not playing the same guitar part. I would say there's more and more of us just doing entirely different things at the same time. And, also another difference is by this point, like this particular lineup is really kind of congealed. And so like Alex's contributions on the drums and Peter's approach to bass, I feel like we're in a pretty, like we're kind of in a good like long form groove per se, with like just creatively with the band. So I feel the new stuff should reflect that.
So Finite is out now through Translation Lost Records. Erol, how can people order the album?
Yes.
What's the best way to get it?
Oh, teethband.bandcamp.com. You can also get it off translationlostrecords.com from the label. Yeah, either way.
Do you want to say anything about the vinyl version?
Believe there's 3 variants. There's cloudy green. There's this like tricolor merge one, and then shit, I forget the last. I'm so not good with this. There's three of them.
I don't know if you guys are having any kind of supply chain issues. I know a lot of bands are having production issues with getting their vinyl on time. Is the vinyl already out?
Yeah, we have it. We were anticipating those vinyl. We were kind of planning. We were expecting it to take quite a bit, but then we got the test presses and we approved them, and they showed up pretty quickly afterwards. So, yeah, we actually had them on hand maybe 2 months before the release date. So, yeah, they are in and they are available.
Very cool. And if people want to follow Teeth online, keep up to date with what you guys are doing, what's the best way to do that?
I'd say the best way is follow us on Instagram. So it would be at Teeth Band. We have a Facebook too, and we have a Twitter, but we honestly don't fucking use it. So Instagram would be the most like current way to keep up with us.
Very cool. And is there anything else you want to say?
Not really, unless you, I don't know if you have any other questions.
No, not really. It was cool. Like I mentioned, Teeth have been on the blog before. It was cool touching base with the band again after 5 years. This has been an interesting few months for me because a lot of the bands that I did Q&As with, like, going back like 7, 8 years, all put out releases in a short period of time. And so it's cool to see like bands are, a lot of the bands that were self-releasing when I first talked to them are now signed to labels and doing well and getting covered by like Decibel and Invisible Oranges and stuff like that. So it makes me feel good. I was on the hype train way early. I bought my seats early.
Oh, wait, you muted.
Oh, sorry. Did you catch any of that?
You were on the high train, then you muted.
Oh, yeah, no, I'm done. I'm just, since this is going to be one of the last episodes of the year, it was cool to talk to a band that I talked to like years ago. And I'm glad that everyone's doing well and being productive, and people are glomming on to what you guys are doing.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. It's it really feels like by this point, like I feel like people are like, when we first started, we really felt like, we were getting up there and just kind of doing our thing, and really felt like not a lot of people got it. Not that like, I mean, that didn't really stop us. That it wasn't like other people getting it has really never been a particular value of ours. Like, just kind of philosophically, like, I think artistically we're all on the same page of like, no, we're gonna get up there and play the shit that we want, that like we're about, and if you get it, then cool, but if you don't, then it's not gonna stop us. But I kind of feel like, certainly by now, I feel like it seems like people are responding quite positively to it, and it's encouraging, and it inspires us to continue, and makes us want to get out and play more and make more records, and just just take the band as far as we can.
I mean, the climate or the mentality when you guys came out was quite different. I think, the old school revival was really in full effect. And, a lot of bands were basically just trying to be more Entombed than Entombed, or more Slayer than Slayer. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And there was kind of this phobia or this allergy to anything that was too progressive or too technical or too whatever. But it seems like bands or at least there's more of an acceptance of bands that take chances now than there was 6-7 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I don't know. Like, I've always been a believer that like music needs to go forward, and that like, I don't know. I feel like I'm not going to name names, but I feel like there's a lot of bands out there that are maybe one notch away from karaoke. And I've never been about
Basically
that.
cover bands, right?
And
Cover bands who write original material.
yeah, exactly. Like there's a certain like, I don't know. And it's just weird to me. It's like, so you just like went back to, I don't know, this span of years in the 80s or the 90s and decided that like those are the aesthetic parameters by which you're going to operate within. And like, that's it. Like, because, which is funny to me because that's not how those bands at that time thought. Right.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah, no, this is a pet peeve of mine because I've always felt that thrash metal, death metal, black metal, well, black metal is a little bit different with, Euronymous wanting to go back to old things, but these forms of music were essentially revolutionary. Bands who were
yeah,
really striving to create something new. And it's
yep,
weird that like that mentality has been almost completely missing for a decade.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, totally with you on that. I mean, it's like the same kind of way. It's almost like it's kind of like a neoclassical mentality, like, but like with regards to death metal or thrash metal, um, which is I don't know. And I mean, the furthermore, some of the bands, like okay, let's take Cannibal Corpse, right? Um, I'd say that's a band that like fits what we're talking about in terms of other bands kind of drawing on their early era of playing. It's like Cannibal Corpse is still a band, but Cannibal Corpse isn't playing the way that they played in 90, like the early 90s. They've developed. Actually, I think their newest record is one of their best in a long time. Um, it's still like has the vibe and ethos of Cannibal Corpse, but it doesn't sound like the Bleeding, you know. Um, so I don't know. I think like I don't know. I just get bored with bands that seem to have that mentality. And I think it's just kind of artistically weak and cowardly, to be honest. Like it's safe, and I don't know. There's nothing more fucking boring than safe metal.
That's an excellent way to end this conversation. Thank you so much, Errol.
You got it.